When I brought Xiaotian home, I hadn't even inserted the key into the lock when I heard the sound of a man and woman laughing inside. Luo Ming and I are the model couple in our neighborhood. Every year, we receive the award for Best Couple from the community. But now, that image seems to be crumbling. Xiaotian, standing behind me, asked casually, "Your niece is visiting?" I knew she was giving me an out. If I followed usual script, I would nod, and that would be the end of it. Xiaotian could quietly gossip about me at the office, while Luo Ming and I would continue to pretend to be the perfect couple. Yeah, my uncle's daughter just graduated from high school this year. She's planning to attend university in our city. Luo brought her to get familiar with the area. I replied, trying to keep a smile on my face, though I'm sure it looked awful. Before I could hastily pull Xiaotian away from the door, the sounds from inside grew more suggestive. I heard the rain hitting the green grass. Well done, Luo Ming. Xiaotian this. Xiaotian looked embarrassed. Visiting a coworker's house only to overhear her husband fooling around with another woman, it was uncomfortable, to say the least. If this got posted on a forum, the thread would probably be as high as Mount Everest. Taking a deep breath, I maintained a facade of peace for the sake of harmony, pretending not to hear anything. I looked innocently at Xiaotian and said, "I know a coffee shop nearby that's really good. It shouldn't be too crowded at this time." There was indeed a cafe at the entrance of our neighborhood. The owner had even paid for promotions and articles to turn it into an Instagram-worthy spot, so it was constantly busy. This meant that instead of sitting down comfortably with Xiaotian to chat about the latest fashion trends as I had hoped, we ended up standing outside with umbrellas, waiting in line. I tugged at my collar, feeling incredibly awkward. Xiaotian, whose makeup was beginning to smudge, didn't look much better. Xiaotian, maybe Luo, was just momentarily blinded. I mean, men, how many of them don't make mistakes? Xiaotian tried to console me. I waved my hand to fan myself. Her comment lumped all men together, including Luo Ming, the same man who had vowed during our wedding to love only me. I twisted the ring on my finger. The diamond wasn't big. When we bought it, we didn't have much money. Luo Ming had picked out the most cost-effective ring, scraping together every penny we could spare. Later, I transferred to the editing department and Luo Ming's career took off. But neither of us ever thought about replacing the rings. I had believed that he would stay true to me for life. I never expected that just after the infamous 7-year itch, he couldn't hold back any longer. Liar. Seeing the look on my face, Xiaotian stopped rubbing salt in the wound and changed the subject, starting to ramble about the office director's receding hairline. It may seem like everyone is living their own life, but if you look closely at how people perk up their ears, you'll realize they're always eavesdropping on someone else's misfortune. Xiaotian, sitting in front of me, was no different. Wearing her delicate jewelry and immaculate makeup, holding her head high, she talked about the most trivial gossip. Today she tells me about the director's baldness, and tomorrow I'm sure I'll see sympathy and the schadenfreude behind it, in the eyes of my colleagues. I know all too well. I used to be one of them. By the time we finally got to the front of the line, Xiaotian got a series of frantic calls from the director, summoning her back to the office to write an urgent article. She shrugged at me apologetically, grabbed her coffee, and left. I sat alone in the cafe, waiting until it was time for me to head back. I hadn't even finished 2 spins of my coffee cup when a young woman sat down across from me. She swept her curls behind her shoulders, revealing a hickey on her neck. She tucked her hair behind her ear and extended her hand toward me. "Miss, can I get the bill, please?" If Xiaotian had been here, she would have recognized it immediately. The voice of this young woman was the same one we had just heard through the door, as sweet and melodious as a nightingale. I had been in the same class as Luo Ming for 7 years. In high school, he risked getting in trouble for early dating by passing me notes, which perfectly showcased his awkwardness as a science student. His notes were filled with cheesy lines borrowed from romance novels, which clashed with my deep passion for studying Tang and song poetry at the time. But what moved me was his persistence. In winter, He insisted on carrying my thermos, and when I refused, he got upset. In summer, he bought me a small fan and even replaced the batteries every week, claiming he was subtly trying to make me feel his kindness. I tried to be clear, telling him outright that there was no chance between us, just like I couldn't understand why his square root of 3 didn't simplify, and he couldn't understand why Susha wrote about the broken bridge covered in snow. I even reported him to the school office for disrupting my studies, nearly accusing him of harassment. He wrote a report, every word sincere, and confessed his feelings again in front of the whole school. If it weren't for his near-perfect scores in math, physics, and chemistry, the principal might have expelled him on the spot. In college, he still stuck to me. On the first day, he lit a heart-shaped circle of candles under my dorm, one by one, only to have them all extinguished by the dorm supervisor with a fire extinguisher. Amid the smoke, he grabbed a megaphone and shouted, "Yang Qian, be with me." At the time, I hid in my dorm, thinking he was ridiculously stupid, embarrassed yet oddly flattered. Finally, the dorm supervisor shouted, "Yang Qian, aren't you coming down? How long are you going to drag this out?" With that, I casually walked downstairs and, amidst the commotion, nodded regally. During our 4 years of undergrad, we fought and even broke up a few times. He spent most of his time in the lab or the library, while I preferred to travel, wandering around the broken bridge in spring, searching for adventures in Osaka in summer, returning to Chongqing in autumn, and heading north to find warmth in winter. I had male friends who shared my interests, and I often stopped short of crossing any lines. I knew deep down that what I loved was the thrill of the new, but old Luo was my true destination. He wasn't romantic, but he was someone I could live with. After graduation, I landed a job at a newspaper, starting as an assistant reporter and slowly working my way up. Luo started at an entry-level position. I had expected him to choose research or go abroad for further studies, but he told me he was afraid I'd run off and wanted to tie me down with a stable job first. On our wedding day, my parents didn't show up, but Luo's family came in full force, making it a lively affair. Over the years, I thought that even though the love between us had faded, we at least had some mutual respect to avoid making our lives too awkward. I was wrong. From the start, I should have known not to have high expectations from an engineer. The young woman extended her hand, asking me to pay her. I took a sip of my coffee, then pulled out my wallet. My freshly painted dark brown nails reached into the silver wallet, and I took out 500 yuan bills, handing them to her. "We agreed on 2,000, didn't we? What's with this 500? She asked with a half smile, dissatisfied, as she slowly adjusted her clothes. "Money really is easy to make these days. I give you one payment, and you can go get another from Xiaoyan. You must have majored in finance, huh? Making double the profit with the same investment." She froze for a moment while fixing her clothes, then looked up in disbelief. Her big, innocent eyes were completely different from my wrinkle-lined ones. No wonder Luo liked her. Did you really think someone my age would be so easily fooled? I pushed the money toward her and said no more, settling the bill for her before heading home. Xiaoyan's visit to my home today was neither a coincidence nor an accident. It was all part of a scheme. But no one's a fool. When the mantis stalks the cicada, it forgets the oriole behind. I had witnessed Luo Ming and Xiaoyan together more than once. Luo often came home late, citing work gatherings. I have light sleep, and his slightest movement would wake me. I would quietly get up and make him a hangover soup while he shed his alcohol-soaked clothes and headed for the shower. In the midst of the overpowering scent of alcohol, I caught a faint whiff of Xiaoyan's jasmine perfume. In his other pocket, I found a button from Xiaoyan's blouse. She often bragged about this particular shirt, claiming it was a custom piece handmade by an Italian designer. There was no mistaking it. It was one of a kind, ensuring I hadn't confused it with something else. Women in their 30s aren't less perceptive. They just choose not to show their suspicions. We become more cunning, not more naive. "Luo Ming, will you be home for dinner?" I casually asked him one weekend last month. Luo glanced at his phone schedule, shook his head, and looked at me apologetically. "Qian, I have a meeting around noon. I might not make it back."
I'm sorry.
I untied my apron, walked up to him, and clung to his arm, playfully teasing, "Then bring me a gift, okay? Do you remember what today is?" Luo gently tapped my nose and said fondly, "Of course, it's our wedding anniversary." Yes, our wedding anniversary. I leaned against the wall and watched him put on his shoes, straighten his collar, grab his bag, and leave without so much as a glance back. Was it my makeup that was too bold, or had I not applied enough foundation? He didn't even want to look at me one last time. 3 Seasons is a bar owned by someone I know. The owner is a returnee from abroad, thinking that his time at a prestigious school could help him build a business empire from scratch. I had often teased him about his lofty ambitions. Luo Ming and Xia Yan sat at their usual spot. Xia Yan, with her meticulous care for Luo, looked more like his wife than I did. She brushed some lint off his shoulder and handed him a glass of water. "Do you have any young girls here?" I asked the owner. He pointed towards a corner where a girl sat. Unlike the other young people with their overstyled hair, she had long, straight black hair that clashed with the bar's vibe, yet she wore a revealing crop top and shorts, paired with 8-centimeter heels, a mix of innocence and rebellion. I took a sip of my drink, feeling more sober than ever. This girl was exactly Luo's type, innocent but wild.
Do-me a favor.
I handed her a drink. She looked up at me, exhaling a puff of smoke. "Sister, I'm not into girls." "Neither am I." I laughed, sitting beside her. She gracefully accepted the drink. "See those 2 over there? Go flirt with the guy." She blew smoke towards my face. "Sister, it's bad karma to be the other woman." I took her cigarette from her mouth and extinguished it in the ashtray, then let the other woman go to hell. She seemed to realize I was the wife. Laughing so hard she nearly cried, she said, "This is hilarious. The wife enlisting a 4th party to break up the husband and the mistress? You think this is a drama?" I handed her 500 yuan as a down payment. She stopped laughing, her eyes fixed greedily on the money. "Okay, flirting I can do, but no funny business." "Do whatever you want," I said, watching her grab her bag and approach the couple. Luo Ming was talking to Xia Yan, but he paused when the girl approached and flirted with him.
Yet he didn't bite.
He gripped the edge of his chair in that familiar, cautious way. He had spent too much time in politics to fall for such an obvious trick. So, why had I bothered setting this up? I took another sip and continued to watch, knowing that Xia Yan wouldn't disappoint me. Anyone who could steal a man from me must have some skill. Sure enough, Xia Yan waved the girl over, whispering something to her. The girl tried to hide her excitement, but I could see the greed in her eyes. She had gotten an even better deal from Xia Yan, preparing to turn against me. I didn't know exactly what Xia Yan had said until that day, when the girl suggested we go back to my place. As we approached the door, we overheard all the chaos inside. Xia Yan's feigned surprise and subtle glee confirmed everything. I realized then that Xia Yan had orchestrated this whole show with a girl to expose Luo's infidelity, forcing me to finally confront the truth. Xia Yan didn't want to remain a mistress forever. She wanted to replace me.
Good.
That's exactly what I wanted too. I smirked and pretended to trip, grabbing onto Xia Yan's sleeve as we left. She thought she was using the girl to drive a wedge between me and Luo Ming, letting her ascend without any scandal. But the knife she wielded was one I had handed her. I had long been ready to end things with Luo Ming. On the day Lao Luo came to sign the divorce papers, his eyes were swollen. Years of living together told me he hadn't slept all night. "Qianqian, I'm really sorry," he said. I believed his apology was sincere at that moment. I took off the small wedding ring from my finger and solemnly placed it on the table. "Lao Luo, we've been married for so many years. I don't want to argue with you anymore. No matter how we lived before, once we sign, we'll go back to being strangers. If we meet on the street in the future, we can greet each other. It's only fair, considering the time we spent knowing each other." He lowered his head in guilt, fidgeting with his wedding ring but not taking it off. His deep, gravelly voice carried a sense of relief. "The house is yours, the car too, and you take 70% of the savings." I nodded. These were things I deserved, and without hesitation, I signed the agreement. As I was about to leave, Lao Luo suddenly grabbed my hand. His bloodshot eyes met mine. "Qian, you've worked hard all these years." His words hit the mark. I knew exactly how hard things had been for me. His mother constantly pressuring me to have children, his younger brother relying on him for a job, and his sister-in-law, a parasite in every sense. But now, none of that mattered anymore. To hell with family drama. I sold everything we jointly owned, the house, the car, and then called my parents.
Dad, I'm exhausted.
I want to come home. But it wasn't over. I've always been the type to repay my grudges. A year later, Lao Luo got promoted to office manager and openly started dating Xia Yan. Apart from some colleagues bad-mouthing Xia Yan behind her back and offering me a few words of comfort, there wasn't much else anyone could do. They were, after all, in a legitimate relationship after our divorce. Then, a month before they were about to get married, Lao Luo had a major incident. There's no shortage of dirty dealings in government offices, with backstabbing that rivals any palace drama. Lao Luo didn't rise to his position by being clean, and with so many people trying to pull him down, he couldn't withstand an investigation. After the divorce, his financial situation had tightened, and planning a second wedding would require him to fork out more money. To top it off, his younger brother's greedy antics were exposed, dragging Lao Luo down with him. The proud office manager Luo turned into suspect Luo and landed in custody. His mother came to me first. The once energetic woman's hair had turned completely white in less than half a year. The arrogance she'd had when accusing me of being unable to have children was gone, replaced by exhaustion etched around her eyes. "Qianer, Lao Luo wronged you back then, but he's about to be sentenced. You have to help him. I may not be educated, but I know that a couple's bond is strong. Your father works in the judiciary. Can't he pull some strings?" I set my cup down, looking at the worn-out woman before me. "Mrs. Luo, this is not the old days. Corruption charges are not something that can just be brushed off. Even if my father works in the judiciary, at most he can help you see him a few more times. Why don't you ask Xia Yan? Weren't you so satisfied with her, always thinking she was better than me? She's capable, and she can have children. Why not let her help you pull some strings?" The old woman grumbled in frustration. "Don't even mention Xia Yan. She broke up with Luo Ming and is now clinging to some young guy, acting shamelessly. Well, I can't help you either, Mrs. Luo. There's nothing more I can do." After seeing her off, I spotted Xia Yan, all dolled up, returning. My former mother-in-law's voice was so loud that the whole office had heard her. My colleagues whispered and gave Xia Yan judgmental looks as she strutted confidently toward the office of the chief.
I'm quitting.
"Thanks for all your care over the years," Xia Yan said loudly, as if she wanted everyone to hear. The chief, not wanting to lose an experienced employee, tried to persuade her. "Xia Yan, our publishing house may not be a top-tier company, but the salary is stable and the benefits are good. The economy out there is terrible right now. If you leave, how will you support yourself?" Xia Yan tossed her head back. "My boyfriend insists on taking me abroad with him. He even wants me to try working for an editorial department overseas. I couldn't refuse, so I agreed." The chief hesitated before reluctantly asking, "Is your boyfriend reliable?" Xia Yan nodded, her face glowing with the smile of a woman in love. "He's a returnee, running his own bar now." My colleagues and I gathered at the window, watching as a handsome young man waited downstairs in a sports car for Xia Yan. He took off his sunglasses and glanced up at us. Our eyes met, and I caught the glint of amusement in his gaze. The fish had taken the bait. Time to reel it in. The bar's young boss called, saying he would be flying away with Xia Yan tonight, and insisted I must go to the airport to intercept them. Xia Yan thought Lao Luo was going to prison and had directly abandoned him for a new, rich benefactor, an affluent young overseas returnee. She believed that men nowadays were so easy to catch, thinking that merely exposing a shoulder or sending a few dramatic messages at midnight would draw all their attention. The young boss pretended to be captivated, chasing after Xia Yan like a lovesick puppy. Now, I was planning to directly slap Xia Yan in the face in front of everyone. Just thinking about it made me feel like all the pent-up frustration from these years would dissipate. The young boss lounged at the boarding gate, unwilling to step inside. Xia Yan, holding her luggage, furrowed her brow but didn't dare to speak up. After Lao Luo's incident happened so suddenly, she had to rush to find another benefactor. I seized on her overconfidence to set her up, otherwise, she likely wouldn't have been so easily hooked. Yang Qian, what are you doing here? Xia Yan looked at me, her eyes widening as if she realized something. I came to pick up my partner. I smiled and held the young boss's hand. Say goodbye to Sister Xia Yan. No more nonsense outside. The young boss lazily waved his hand and then immediately turned to pull me away from the frustrating airport. Doing this once is enough. You have no idea how many times Xia Yan almost kissed me. She nearly scared me to death. I glanced back at Xia Yan's face, which looked like a watercolor painting that had been splashed with water, her features smudged. She fell to the ground, already unable to recover anything, having abandoned Lao Luo and now given up her job. I heard that Lao Luo's case had been reopened because key evidence was unclear. He was likely to be reinstated. She was genuinely left with nothing, both in love and money. The young boss, Mu Ran, was someone I met during my years abroad. The more we got to know each other, the more we found that our parents had some connections too. His parents ran a textile business abroad, while my mom had taken on a few contracts from their company back home. Mu Ran pursued me for several years, but I rejected him because of Lao Luo. I firmly believed that two people with different personalities could complement each other and be together. I also believed that Lao Luo's love for me would never change. But I was wrong. Back then, I was so determined to marry Lao Luo that my parents were furious and didn't want to associate with me. My dad, a cadre at the deputy level, pointed his finger at me but couldn't say a word. He had seen too many young men like Lao Luo, who would initially swear to protect me for life, but once they saw a better world outside, they might forget even what I looked like. That's why he didn't come to my wedding. My mom secretly supported me for a few months, but just coldly said that life was a choice I made and I had to keep moving forward, as long as I didn't feel wronged. I willingly transformed from a girl who flew around Hong Kong and Europe shopping every day into a housewife who only shopped for brand names on Taobao. I went from never touching water to dealing with the daily grind of household chores. Then, I suddenly realized that I had given so much for a man who ended up cheating on me. I chose this marriage, and it was up to me to slowly destroy it. I asked Mu Ran for help. I had seen too many women like Xia Yan around my dad. I knew what schemes they had in their hearts better than anyone else. She truly took the bait. The best way to deal with her wasn't to exhaust myself trying to salvage this failed marriage, but rather to let her fall flat in the area she was most adept at, falling hard enough that she could never stand up again. I remembered that Luo Ming had asked me during my undergraduate years what my favorite book was. I replied that I liked Dream of the Red Chamber. He scoffed and said he preferred Stephen Hawking's A Brief History of Time. Unfortunately, everything couldn't go back. The boy who once loved me had turned into a sentimental, beer-bellied uncle, and I had transformed from a romantic girl into a scheming woman. We were two sides of the same coin.